皆様こんばんは。翻訳スポーツエクスプレスにようこそ。今日は明日から始まるメジャーリーグプレーオフディビジョンシリーズの話題を中心に日本人選手にフォーカスしてお届けしていきます。今回は大谷翔平選手、山本由伸選手、そして千賀滉大選手の3人の活躍に注目した内容になっています。それでは早速現地の盛り上がりを一緒に見ていきましょう。まずはロサンゼルスから大谷翔平選手についての注目の番組を翻訳してお届けします。大谷選手は今回のディビジョンシリーズでもその活躍がかなり期待されています。特に彼の類いまれなバッティング、そして足の速さ、強さが注目されており、ピッチングができない今シーズンでも打撃と走塁でチームに貢献してきました。その活躍がこの大舞台でも見ることができるのか、現地解説者たちもワクワクが止まらない様子です。それでは見ていきましょう。Here we go.
So Shohei Ohtani, we have talked numerous times on this particular show. Boy, wouldn't it be nice if we could see Shohei Ohtani in the postseason? Well, now we're going to get it. And Jake, I can't wait to see what we're going to see from Shohei Ohtani on the biggest stage.
Oh, I can't wait either. And look, it just got me going. I've got tons of friends out in the Dodger family. Really, Jose Mota is the glue to this because he's seen him in Anaheim those first years and has been in LA, to his eyes. But Dave Roberts, Mookie Betts, a former teammate, and it just got me thinking of how intentional this season was. Shohei Ohtani signs this $700 million deal, and when he did, he was adamant that it is my rules. I get to pitch and I get to hit. You don't tell me what to do. Not being able to pitch, he showed up at Dodger stadiums, and you see these workouts. You see Fan Fest. He was working out as hard as we've ever seen him work out. He was the first man in camp at camp. He couldn't swing a bat yet, but he was there. He couldn't throw a ball yet, but he was there. He was intentionally working on this right here. Leg strength, power, speed, stolen bases. How do I get it right? The only season that he's going to have to run wild, not be a pitcher. The reins are going to be pulled back. You can't have him sliding all over if he's getting huge outs. So I just think it's important for us to know as players, you want to know what the best in the world do? Every year, no matter how great they are, they go back to the drawing board, see how to get better. They did that with Shohei, and he delivers a season that we've never seen.
He was caught 4 times stealing. 4.
I think what's crazy is we all knew he was probably going to sign for with the Dodgers. He signs with them. They are littered with superstars. Betts, Freeman, the list goes on. He covered them all up.
I didn't know he was this kind of hitter.
He's
this?
that much. Like,
It's
crazy.
And
Judge does it in New York. He covers up, he covers up Soto, right? Like, Soto's a star in our game, but it's Judge.
I'm challenging every player in the league to go to the offseason, look at your game, and get better. The best in the best player that we are talking about maybe of all time is doing it.
Game 7 World Series, does he pitch?
No, you can't risk that.
Absolutely.
No.
If he's
To
healthy,
win a title?
Don't be shocked. Don't be shocked. I'm not breaking any news. He's throwing bullpens. If he comes to you, you're Dave Roberts, and he says in the NLCS and says, Skip, there's a chance. I'd be like,
I'm gonna say, if I'm Dave Roberts, I'm like, yes, you may, Shohei Ohtani.
この3連戦で大谷翔平選手は何打数何安打、そして何本のホームラン、そして何個の盗塁を記録するのでしょうか。そして番組内でもありましたが、まさかの投手登板はあるのか。あったらドキドキしちゃいますよね。それもワールドシリーズ第7戦、バッターはアーロン・ジャッジなんて、そんな場面があったら僕たちは興奮で夜しか眠れません。続いては明日の第1戦で先発予定の山本由伸選手の話題です。山本選手は今回のディビジョンシリーズで注目の一人ですが、解説者たちは彼のピッチングに大きな期待を寄せています。特に対戦相手に対する戦略やその圧倒的な投球術が高く評価されています。彼の球種の多さ、そして制球力がポストシーズンの舞台でどのように生かされるのか。また1年目で緊張もあるとは思いますが、本来の実力が発揮されるのが見逃せませんね。それでは現地番組の様子を見ていきましょう。Here we go.
The Dodgers swapped their first 2. Originally, Jack Flaherty was going to go in Game 1. Now it'll be Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Interesting decision, and Andrew Friedman, the president of baseball operations for the Dodgers, said he did it because they wanted to have more flexibility. I look at it and think it gives them less flexibility, because if Flaherty was pitching in game 1, then he was going to make the start in game 5. But if they were down 2-1 in the series, then game 4 was critical, and you could have had Flaherty start on short rest. With Yamamoto, he can't start on short rest because of the injury factor, because he's come from Japan. They give him the extra day. And so it feels to me, by moving Flaherty out of the game 1, they have less flexibility about what they might do in game 4 if they're down 2-1. And so what do you make of that issue and the idea of potentially setting up to have somebody come back on short rest?
I understand where you're coming from, but I'm going to come at it in a different way. Of if I gave somebody $300 million, $325, whatever they gave Yamamoto, he's got to be my guy to go out there and do it. And I just don't know that I trust Flaherty, and just not because of what he's done this year, but last year was just a little bit on the face. Who shows up in the biggest moment? If I'm a Dodger fan and I'm a Dodger front officer, I'm putting the guy that we just entrusted $300 million into to go out and win game 1. And do away with that issue. That
All right, so let me push back on a little bit. Like, get this, because if Yamamoto were to pitch in game 2, he would be on 5 days, 4 days rest, pitch on a regular 5th day in a rotation for game 5. They're scheduling it to give him the extra day, because that's generally what he's used to. I think that going with him in game 5 on 4 days rest is still good enough to be able to set him up to be successful.
Well, I think what's interesting, and when I hear the word flexibility, I think of, okay, so what options does this potentially open? Well, if Yamamoto goes game 1, he's on his regular rest for game 5. And then Flaherty, because game 2 is the next day, would be on his regular rest for game 5. So you would have an option of which one you could go to based on maybe what they did in the first game, of their respective starts in this series. But you also have the option of Flaherty, maybe if he goes game 2, making his bullpen day an inning or 2 in a game that will be a bullpen game, and maybe he extends your bullpen and then you have Yamamoto going game 5. So maybe that's where they're looking at the flexibility, and I don't know, but that's what I would say. It gives them the option to have Flaherty in game 4, throwing an inning or 2, and then still having what they consider to be an ace in Yamamoto. I'm sure they consider them 1 and 2, A and B, whatever you want to call it, and you could basically then have Yamamoto as your ace going game 5.
Yeah, it's interesting. Look, I don't know if there's a right answer to it or not.
But we'll find out. We'll find out.
Even if it doesn't work, it may not mean that it was the wrong or right answer.
That's true.
With it.
You know what? I want to add something, Steve, that you just brought up. In both championships that I were a part of, I watched John Lackey come out of the bullpen. John Lester, same thing. Madison Bumgarner in 14. Does it happen? Any run that I was a part of, you do take a starter, as you know, Steve. So I think that could happen in the Flaherty thing, but it just comes down to who's better. I think Flaherty went about 2 innings in the last postseason start or so last year. Yamamoto, to me, is hands down. He got $300 million because he's much better, than Flaherty.
メジャーリーグでの高額契約を勝ち取った山本選手、そして1年目の今年、なかなか思うような活躍ができていないのも事実かもしれません。しかし、現地番組を黙らせるには本来のピッチングをするしかありません。明日の山本選手、活躍に期待していきましょう。最後にまさかの千賀滉大投手の話題です。ワイルドカードシリーズでは投手登録もなかった千賀滉大選手ですが、まさかのこのタイミングでのロースター入り、そしてロースター入りと同時に監督から第一戦での先発が発表されました。今シーズン千賀投手はほとんどを怪我で過ごし、わずか1年間で5イニングと少ししか投げていませんでした。それがここに来てのまさかの登板。ソフトバンク時代から怪我で大舞台に流されてきた千賀選手ですが、今回はなんとポストシーズン側に合わせてくるというとんでもないことをやらかしてくれました。なぜこのタイミングで彼が登板することになったのか、その理由は監督が語ってくれましたので、ぜひ一緒に見ていきましょう。Here we go.
Meantime, Kodai Senga named the starter for Game 1. Only pitched 5 1/3 innings this season. What went into that decision for Carlos Mendoza?
Yeah, this was a surprise to me, and I think this was a surprise to a lot of people, Adnan. This is a guy who has only pitched 5 and change innings this year. As recently as early this week, talking to Carlos Mendoza, he almost laughs a little when you ask about Kodai Senga because he hasn't been around, he hasn't been available, he's been very deliberate in that rehab process, and he wants to make sure he checks every box. But the reason why the Mets were comfortable doing this is because this wasn't a situation where Mendoza, David Stearns went to Kodai Senga and said, hey, are you good to pitch? This was a situation where Kodai Senga called them and said, I want to pitch, I feel good, I'm ready. And that's what gave the Mets the confidence, not just to put Kodai Senga on their playoff roster, on their NLDS roster, but to slot him in one for the Game 1 start, which is obviously a very big assignment for anyone, let alone someone who hasn't pitched in a major league game in 2.5 months.
Let's see how that goes for it. Get going. The Mets have been road warriors right now, Anthony. They haven't been home since September 22nd. How does the rest of the staff line up for Game 1 and beyond for this Mets team?
Well, we don't know how long Kodai Senga is going to go. I suspect it's not going to be longer than 2 innings. He's not really stretched out as a starter right now. It could be just 1 inning or even a few batters for Kodai Senga. But the Mets are in pretty good shape. In addition to having today's rest for all of their regular bullpen members, they have David Peterson, who only threw 8 pitches closing out Game 3 of the Wild Card Series. He could give them a heavy workload. As could Tyler McGill, who was not on the Wild Card Series roster. He last pitched in Atlanta in that doubleheader on Monday. He's fully rested. He's willing to give the Mets a full starter's workload as well. So it's not a matter of how many innings the Mets can get out of their bullpen. They have more than enough that they need for Game 1 against the Phillies. It's just who pitches when, how long can Senga go, what do the Mets do once he's out of the game. The good news also for the Mets, they have a fully rested Luis Severino ready to go for Game 2.
And last thought for you, Anthony, because you're talking about the bullpen plans, what Carlos Mendoza can do. How about the fact he went to Diaz in the 7th? Critical move in hindsight.
Yeah, absolutely. And the game looked like it was getting away from the Mets right there. They brought in Edwin Diaz, who, by the way, was shaky there in the 7th inning, but he managed to shut the door and then managed to pitch the 8th inning, a perfect 8th inning as well. And what's funny about that, Adnan, is after the 8th inning, Edwin Diaz, who had just thrown almost 40 pitches, went to Carlos Mendoza in the dugout and said, I want the 9th as well. Mendoza said, no, we're good. They went to David Peterson instead, and he did a great job closing that one out. But Diaz, the Mets have been so careful with him all season. They have gotten heavy with his usage over the past week, and I expect that's going to continue throughout the rest of October.
That's a great tidbit. Thanks for sharing. I was thinking, can Diaz go 3? Maybe at some point in this postseason. Anthony DiComo, you look great for a guy who hasn't slept in weeks. Good stuff. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
まさかの志願登板での今回の先発登板となるようです。怪我の状態はどの程度なのか、そしてお化けフォークはさえ渡るのか、もうこの大舞台でノーヒットノーランなんて見たくもなっちゃいますよね。明日の投球注目していきたいと思います。それでは皆さん、明日から始まるディビジョンステージ、くれぐれも寝坊しないように今日は早く寝ましょう。おやすみなさい。